Morena koutou katoa. Ai, ko Moera Brown tauku ingoa, he mokopuna hau o ngā iwi o Tūranganui a Kiwa. Titiro ki tērā taha te onero o Hineha Kirirangi. So the long walking place of Hineha Kirirangi, who eventually found in the centre of the universe, a place to grow the kumara on the maunga of Manawatu. And she was one of the 3 rangatira that arrived on Harauta Waka, which is how several of us in this room connect. Anyway, less about me and more about the doing. What we're going to do is, as we talk, we will introduce the respective speakers. But we're a team that's currently involved with the systems improvement work. And then after you've had your morning tea, we'll introduce another component of a team that's working within the system, supported by the Ministry of Justice. This little, let's look to make sure it was there. This little slide is a whakapapa journey, the 8-year journey. And it's just to give you some context that things in respect of methodologies or ways of learning or systems improvement don't come alone. So you've already heard how we got to be the regional governance group and the Manaaki Tairāwhiti. In that, and this is the iwi perspective that I'm providing, there was an opportunity through Oranga Tamariki to consider what a children's team would look like for Tairāwhiti. Just goes to show you how passionate we are in this place, because the person that opened the forum was one of our first children's team directors. And in that space, the CEO of the Runanga of Tūranganui a Kiwa and the then CEO of Ngāti Porou Hauora were involved in working in that space to provide an iwi lens on how we should work with Whānau. Then when we were place-based initiative, we were introduced to better everyday coaches. So from the children's team had an evaluation, and then from that work you will hear in respect of where the navigators' work evolved. And it was a comment by Jim Green, who was the Tairāwhiti District Health Board CEO, who said, well, we should just do whatever it takes. And you'll hear more about that component of work and what happened in that space. So the Better Everyday Coaches introduced us to the Vanguard method from the UK, which dealt with productivity lines. There was a fair bit of cynicism about that. But they certainly came with some credentials in respect of developing electronic passwords and also sorting out the NovaPay issue, which was news at the time. So from that work, systems improvement, which started with the managers, which created what we called the dungeon, but it's now called the bunker, which created the work that you see initially if you're introduced into the space. Then we got the people on the ground who really do the work, the practitioners to actually test the methodologies. Then we had your organisations such as MSD, Corrections, and also to some extent Oranga Tamariki put their hand up and say, we'll take this and see where it leads. But of course COVID arrived and amongst all that. So today we're going to give you a sense of where we're sitting. In 22, 23 probably, Ron particularly, through the iwi of Tūranganui a Kiwa, but in conversation with Ngāti Porou, decided that we would test how iwi could lead in a partnership. And you will see where that space has taken us as well. But before we get into the work that we've been doing, let's see how good technology really is. So the next presenter when she was 21, 22, was encouraged by her father to go and find a job with some people who work in the vanguard work. And she's been there ever since. It was in the UK. She found a Kiwi person and arrived in New Zealand probably 6 years ago. And we've been fortunate to have her expertise. So I'd just like to welcome Sarah Benjamin, who's probably in cold Wellington. Who's in Wellington?
Right.
Kia ora, Sarah.
Let's see if the wonder of modern technology works for us today. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this. I wish I could be there in person, but I'm delighted to be able to be there electronically anyway. I'm just going to share my screen and hope that this works.
All good.
And we can see that?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So as Moera said, my background has been working with the Vanguard method, and these are the frameworks that have predominantly been applied in the system improvement work in Manaaki Tairāwhiti. As always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be involved in this work. And I now head up a team of coaches hosted within MSD who use these frameworks and a variety of others to help other organisations apply systems, theories and principles to their way of working. So I'm just going to speed date you through what that means and a little bit of background about where this comes from before I hand back to Moera and the team to take you through their own journey of this. So John Seddon is the founder of the Vanguard method. He's an occupational psychologist by trade. And that's, for me, is important to keep in the back of your mind, because the whole reason the Vanguard method came to be was because he's being asked to come into organizations, study them, and help explain to the senior leaders what was happening, why it was happening, and some of the behaviors that they were seeing. That opened up a whole new world for him. And what he started to understand was that most of our organizations are based on very conventional logic. Born from manufacturing, we tend to design our organizations as top-down functional hierarchies. He saw decision-making being reasonably separate from the work, and the majority of measurement being based around outputs and heavily related to budget. Now, what he saw, because he was predominantly working in service organizations, is that it created some real limitations in the way in which we can understand ourselves. He saw customer or client view predominantly missing from the way in which we worked. He saw output measures being problematic in really understanding that client experience. He started to see that those silos and those functions actually got in the way of collaboration and that end-to-end view of the way in which we design and deliver service. This turned him to the work of the systems thinkers and people like Taiichi Ono of the Toyota production system. And he started to understand the principles on which they base their ways of working. He articulated that, as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide. So what he started to understand was that they were really looking to understand and absorb the variety that naturally hits service organizations because we're dealing with people. He saw that rather than a top-down perspective, outside in was really helpful. How do we anchor ourselves in client and the client experience? How do we start to understand the end-to-end flow of work? And as he started to play with these principles, he said, this is great, but how do you do it? The psychologist side of him recognized that if an organization was going to apply a really different lens, they needed to be able to own it for themselves. What was also important is that they had an experience, a normative experience of applying that lens, so that they could make informed choice about what worked and what was most efficient and effective, more importantly, for their organization. So this was the problem he sought to solve. And how he went about doing that was by drawing on the best that he could find from these principles and empirically experimenting with frameworks that allowed organizations to do that journey for themselves. There is now a 3-phase process, and there's a framework that sits underneath each of these. And it starts with understand. 2 reasons, as I'd already talked about, that normative experience of practical application of a different lens for that organisation itself, but also because he saw a lot of large programs starting with plan. And he saw that as problematic because we had great sounding plans and then we had to work out how to get there. He saw that it was a lot more effective to actually understand current state, then understand where you'd like to head towards, and then you've got a much clearer journey through. So when you've understood current state, that gives you the foundation stones to start testing in that space of effectiveness. That builds the empirical data and evidence that you really need in order to move to make normal and sustainable and to grow and make efficient that effective design. When that shows shoots, the idea of the iterative triangle is to actually then keep going back to the beginning and create that cycle of continual improvement. There's 2 core frameworks that are being operationalized through that process. The first, purpose measures method, is alive and kicking in every organization. So this is looking twofold to understand what the current purpose of the organization is, or sometimes the de facto purpose, and then reorientate to a client perspective. And if we're looking at it through that client lens, from observing the client journey, what is it they are wanting from our services? What matters to them in the design and delivery? How do we develop measures that actually demonstrate those things to us? And then how do we start looking at the ways of working to really challenge ourselves to think about whether they're effective in their delivery? So that moves us into the second framework, which is really understanding the performance. In doing that, we start to see all the barriers and the things that help us in the work as well. When we're looking at barriers and things that hinder us, this is typically as organizations where we fall into the trap of going through what psychologists call a single loop of learning. We look to improve within the confines of current state. So we assume certain things to be truth. Russ Ackoff, the systems thinker, often described this as doing the wrong things righter. So we're just doing things better. What this is encouraging us to do is go through a double loop that actually challenges the beliefs and the thinking that put that service design in place. Not for goodness or badness, just to say, well, actually, if it's not delivering, how might we change our thinking to create a different design? Or in the words of Ackoff, do the right thing. So it's not about doing things better, it's about doing better things entirely. So what this is really looking to help an organization work through for themselves are the foundation stones, the anchor points through this whole process that can keep people true to why we exist as an organization or collective of organizations, that we have a clear articulation of purpose, that we have a really clear understanding of what matters to our customer or clients, whatever the end recipient of our service is, that we have measures that actually help us to understand and improve, that they give us all the signals and data and information that we need to really know what's going on to the best of our ability, including live feedback loops in the work, and that we've really appreciated the principles and the behaviors that are required to create a learning organization, to be able to look across those silos and those functions and really question ourselves continuously on the basis of what matters and how effective our delivery is. And that's the journey that myself and my coaches have been privileged enough to go on with Manaaki Tairāwhiti. I'll hand back to Moera and the crew to actually take you through what that looks like.
So part of the work that we did, as I said, when we started, and you'll see that the Vanguard method talks about customer. For Tairāwhiti, it's Whānau. And we will give you our iteration of Whānau very soon. But the people on the ground and the operational leads for 20 weeks identified what mattered to Whānau. Some of these you'll be familiar with, some of them will be new to you. But obviously, I know the right door to open to get help. I don't have to fit a criteria. I need to trust and know that my story is confidential unless I give permission to share, and so on. Probably what we wanted to introduce into this deficit thinking space was aspirational things like support me to meet my aspiration and goals. I have the opportunity to feedback and input into any change of plan. So now I'm going to introduce you to another mokopuna of Tūranganui-a-Kiwa and Ngāti Porou. And Jayne Wyllie hails from a shapeshifter, or she'll tell you who kororo, but she hails from a shapeshifter. She also hails from a person of many lovers. And then she gets to go up to Ngāti Porou and Ngāti Konohi and get resettled into what she really is, a peacemaker. But Jayne leads the Awatea family harm work, so kia ora, Jayne.
Morena koutou, as Auntie Moera said, ko Jayne Wyllie tōku ingoa, he uri hau no te Tairāwhiti, ko Ngāti Konohi, rongo whakata me ngai tāmanuhiri o ku iwi. He kai whakawhiriwhiri a hau mō Manaaki Tairāwhiti. So I'm Jayne. I am currently the Awatea program lead for Manaaki. Awatea is one of our work streams in Manaaki Tairāwhiti for systems improvement. In its conception, we originally were focusing on family harm, and as you will see through some of the presentations, it's morphed to a lot more. So I'm going to just give you a quick speed date around the family harm work that was done in these methods that Moera and Sarah have talked about, to give you an idea of how we applied it in a system. So in 2019-2020, Te Runanga o Tūranganui-a-Kiwa and the police released 2 staff to do this work. I was the iwi person on behalf of Trotac, and Detective Sergeant Smith, I think I might have just promoted him, was the police, my police colleague who was released. And so between the two of us, through the height of COVID, we set about, along with the assistance from a few organisations that sit here and some community people, we set out to understand the Tairāwhiti family harm system. So Sarah mentioned the iterative triangle that you would have seen. So when we do this work, we understand the system. For family harm, we did that in 3 ways. We did that by observing parts of the system. That was our first way. And what you see here is an observation that we did in the police college. So we wanted to see what our frontline staff and police who responded to family harm, what they were being taught and what they understood about family harm. So we spent a week in Wellington going and observing that work that they would do. And it was to observe the work in terms of their training anyway, as it takes place. And also to see from them what are the things that mattered that police were teaching them when they responded to family harm. So the idea was what we wanted to be able to do was, from those observations, was to identify the barriers in the training, but also not just the barriers. What were the things in our system that created police college to make them do that, I suppose is what we would call it. And then what's our thinking behind those system conditions, right? So we wanted to really drill down into those details in our observations to get to the root causes, I guess. So there was a number of observations we did. This was an example of one that you can see. And so none of it is unsurprising. We were surprised by the fact that in police college they're given some really good training in terms of how to respond to family harm, being more empathetic with families, and the sort of things to expect. They did lots of role playing, and we were lucky to participate in that with them as actors, so that they could get a real understanding of the sort of environments they'd come to in the community. So very impressed by what they were taught. But as you can see, in terms of barriers, from a whānau's perspective too, to be clear, right? That's what we were trying to identify, is from a whānau's perspective, what were the barriers? So in terms of some of the training, it's very much prescriptive, right? Lots of checklists, lots of assessment, lots of legislation that impacts on what and how they do things. What it came down to, though, was there was I guess a break in between what they were learning at the college and what they were implementing here around ongoing training on how to apply those methods. So observations was our first understand piece that we did. The next thing we did is what we did case studies. So we got permission from whānau that had presented in family harm. We got their consent to unpack their story from the end-to-end journey. And we pulled everything. So anyone that worked with these families, we pulled all their information. And what we wanted to see again was we were trying to drill down to see what they experienced as they went through family harm. And the other thing we did is we did this with people in the community. So if Oranga Tamariki was involved with this family, they did the work with us because what it required was us getting their case notes and unpacking that stuff. If health were involved, MSD, we invited them to participate because part of it was so they could see for themselves what whānau we're experiencing because of their organisations. Not because of the people, to be clear, it was because of the organisations or the systems of those organisations. So yes, we used the case notes and we pulled out evidence of, incidents from their family harm experience. We were looking for whānau voice. So whānau voice drove everything. And I don't mean my perception of what the whānau voice was. I'm talking about verbatim what they were asking for in those incidents. Because to be clear, there's a distinct difference between whānau-centric and whānau voice. We wanted to know what they were asking for and in what way they wanted us to respond. And also our capability and capacity as a community to be able to respond in a way that the families wanted. And then again, performance system thinking, right? Performance is around the barriers that whānau experienced. The system conditioners, those things in our system that we create in our organisations that create the barriers, but also what was our thinking behind us creating those system conditions. And so as an example, a barrier that we saw in our case studies was we had multiple agencies and parts of agencies working with whānau but in isolation. So as an example, we might have had the whangai ngā Paharekeke, who was our family harm. I'm not picking on you, Deb, sorry. You're just sitting there. We might have had our family harm team from whangai who was working with a whānau, but also in the back there was community policing who were providing education. We discovered neither of the two were talking to each other, and nor did we have effective vehicles for them to share information and to really collaborate. So that's what case studies allowed us to do, similar to observations. We were able to really dig down to find out what were families asking for when they came in front of police for family harm, and how did we respond as a community. And there was lots. The barriers that we discovered will be no surprise to any of you, right? Functionalisation, criteria for service, all those sort of things is what we found. And to be clear, it wasn't only in government agencies that we found this, it was everybody. And the other thing I want to point out is it wasn't that those frontline people mean to do that, but they are a product of the system or the organisation that they work in. Okay, so it's not to pick on anybody, but the reality was this is what a system does. It creates the practice, or it influences the practice that our frontline are doing, even though they have good intentions. So case studies was our second way we understood our system. The third was data. We all know data is king. And we looked at two types of data. We looked at this, what you see in front of you is demand data. It is whānau voice. So this is what we collect verbatim from families. And it's, the whānau voice is, I want because. So police would go, or our kaiawhina or our community workers would go, and these were the type of things that people were asking for. To be clear, this is from 2019 to 2020, where we had Whānau Paharekeke, who's our family harm provider here, who were collecting this sort of information. So you can see examples of what that demand data was from Whānau Voice. I want a system from Whangaia to navigate a type of a system, whether it be courts, mental health, or rangatamariki. I want counselling because we've got relationship issues. So it was really important for us to have that in conjunction with national data, right? Demographic data. What you see in front of you is some of the police data that was collected during the same period, 2019 to 2020. And so this is collected by Police National Office. The type of information that we collected during this period was, in Tairāwhiti, there were 3,137 family harm episodes. In those episodes, over 4,000 people were involved. Of those episodes, of those 4,000 people, there were over 1,300 children that were present in family harm, and 879 of the people in those family harm episodes had been exposed to 4 or more incidences of family harm in that period. And so what we knew from the statistics that police gave us was that 60% of those reported episodes were predictable and potentially preventable. At the time of this study we did, we had what was called the triage table here in Tairāwhiti. It's had a few iterations, and I think it's currently called allocation. So what the triage process is, is family harm, whānau that present to police for family harm through a 111 call, come to what's called a triage or an allocation community table. It is a table of government organisations and community groups that talk about those cases from the night before and try to respond. So what our police data showed us was that 80% of those family harm episodes were referred to this triage table to respond to. 57 of them were already engaged in a plan pre-triage, but there was no visibility who was prior of who was working with them or how effective those interventions were. 55% presented again for repeated family harm episodes post-triage. So if we think about some of the case study that I just showed you and that data, we see in both sets of data evidence of multiple agencies working with whānau, but not speaking to each other. So that's how we used our data. We're really clear about the fact that both data sources were important. One tells a picture, the other gives us the detail in terms of how we respond. The fourth thing we did, we looked at purpose. So Sarah mentioned purpose measures method before. So we wanted to look at we wanted to understand our system was to look at the purpose. So here you'll see in this period, these are the purposes for the family harm system. Whakamananga whānau, that was Whangaia's, empowering whānau. What we got from all the understand work was that in terms of Hollywood, which is the de facto purpose, right? The purpose of the system is what it does. From Whānau Voice, this is what we saw it did to whānau. It responded to incidences only. It was very transactional. It attempts to make them safe now without thinking about the long-term underlying issues. It coerced and punished people to change their way. It held them accountable. It focused on either the victim or the perpetrator. It didn't focus on everyone that was exposed. So there was no consistent support for children, which is why we had huge numbers. There was lots of handoffs and dividing responsibility or allocating to another agency. We call it a handoff, right? There was lots of that, not my responsibility, they'll do it. So that's what the actual system did to whānau from their perspective. When we talked to whānau themselves, we interviewed them and asked them, what do you want? What do you want from family harm? What do you want from Whangaia? these are the sort of things that they talked about, in line with what Auntie Moera talks about, what mattered to whānau. We want to be a whānau, we want to be heard, we want help, we want to be understood, we don't want to be judged, we want control of our life and sorting out our relationships, we just want to be together. So that was really important for us to see, especially when we were going to redesign and try something different, was to understand if, to move forward, we had to be really clear about what our system or our service delivery looked like so that it responded to what families were asking for, because the purpose is what anchors all our work. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, but the understand work, this is the Tairāwhiti family harm system. Okay, it's very complex, and if you'd like to have a look at that in more detail, I can show you it. But essentially, what we learned from doing the understand work for family harm was it's a complex system. There's a lot of waste work, and when I mean waste work, there's a lot of 10 cars up the driveway, lots of duplication of work, not sharing of information. That's what we call waste work. This system is reactive, and it's very deficit thinking. It just responds to the here and now. There are a lot of subsystems that impact on our performance to respond to whānau voice, whānau needs, and whānau demands. And as you can see, or may not see, part of that is there's corrections process, there's oranga tamariki process, there's courts process, MOJ process. All of them impact on our ability as a community to respond to family harm. There's competing priorities. If we think about everyone that's involved in them, we all have our own individual purposes, but we didn't have one for an entire system. And so it became very functionalized and very isolated work. I just talked about it. So it was really hard for us to work as collectively as a community. And so from all the understand work, we then, and redesign, we used all that work to then stand up a test and learn, right? And so that it was the birth of Awatea. Awatea was our test and learn space. So along with myself, we also had two of Sarah's workers that were dedicated to us full time, MSD coaches. We then, for 6 months, we had a secondment from a ministry from mental health, from oranga tamariki, Barnados, and then part-time we got others in MSD, housing, or, depending on what the cases we would do. And so what we wanted to test was this, based on what we had learnt. We also wanted to test new purposes. And so what you see there is 2 iterations of how the purpose grew as we tested. The purposes were from a whānau's point of view and what mattered to them. It needed to make sense and relate to the actual work that we were doing, but also the purpose needed to be shared by all within the system to enable the support and a joined up workforce. The system needed to act at the earliest opportunity to the presence of known indicators. So the purple box, which you can probably see the purple but not what's in it, are some of those early indicators. And it's things like trauma, disability services, undiagnosed, the presence of disruptive disability, disconnection culturally, religiously. So the system needed to be addictions. The system needed to be able to react at the earliest opportunity because it wasn't. Whānau could knock on any door and get the help they needed. And engagement was reciprocal because it was a trusted relationship, because we used whānau voice to lead our response and we listened to build rapport. Collectively, we all had to understand a whānau and their context so that we would be able to support and respond to the whānau as we continued to learn and review what we were doing. We needed to be able to provide them with options and choice, and whānau could choose and retain control, so that whānau could choose and retain control of their lives. Also, it needed to be a perpetual learning system. that embedded learning according to what we were learning as we were testing. And the insights from testing this work, the insights that we got from this test, in conjunction with work that had been done by the children's team, Te Pāharakeke, and the previous Manaaki Tairāwhiti work in MSD corrections and 50 families, contributed towards the Tairāwhiti way of working, which I won't go into detail here, but you'll hear more about it through Leslyn later on. And so that's the end of my contribution. I'm now going to pass it on to Auntie Gina, who will elaborate on how this work supports service design and implementation for some of the work that we've done through TROTAC.
Mauri ora ki te whare, mauri ora ki a koutou ngā reo ngā mana e tai mai ki runga i te karanga o tēnei huinga, ko te kaupapa whakahirahira. It's an awesome kaupapa, pivoting mainly because of the great people that sit in this space. So tēnā mihi rau atu ki a koutou. I have the blessing of using this implement. I will do my best in terms of where I'm at in the technological world. Hey, we learn a lot in COVID times, revert back to what works. Nā reira. I have the privilege of just talking a little bit around the mahi that I have the great privilege to work alongside of many in Tairāwhiti. He mihi kauana ki ngā kaiwhakahaere o te iwi o te runanga nui o Ngāti Parau me Ngāti Parau hoki. The cultivation of their insight and generosity to let us explore this way of being for our whānau serves a greater purpose that allows us to look at the way in which we engage. So this kaupapa here is a way of working. Now you will notice that there are there's our words in te reo, and then there's our English words. It's like a left and a right hand. They're not a translation of one and the other. This is simply an opportunity for us in our real world to practice. And so in terms of the English words, it just gives a context, okay? So there's a practice and then there's a context. So this kaupapa here is the Tairāwhiti way of working. And just in terms of the way in which we do this, it's really important, as was previously identified, that whānau voice drive absolutely everything. And oftentimes when whānau are in systems, the system is asking them to respond to criteria. And one of the great insights when you involve yourself with whānau is that those criteria are often at the very last on their list. So they'll come before forums like Oranga Tamariki or the courts and just say yes, yes, because there's so much happening in the background. And then when they go outside of that forum and you say, did you understand it? They go, no. So a lot of that information is passing over their heads. So this kaupapa here allows practitioners to pause, reflect, and look at who is the best person involved or best suited according to the whānau, identifying that. So relationship is really key. Foundationally, whānau drive the way in which this engagement happens. Let us begin. Whakawhanaungatanga is basically the person when they come in through our door, any door. Sometimes our system says, I'm involved with this particular service. No, we don't deal with that. You have to go to here, and then they'll give you a referral and you come back here. So in this kaupapa here, no wrong door. Any door that they come through, the hope is that that person is able to be met by their need and guided walked alongside of, guided into where they're needing to be. So the whakawhanaungatanga is the practice to be able to listen, 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 listen. That's the engagement, the whakawhanaunga. It requires not just hearing, but actually being able to be meaningful in the way in which we're asking for guidance from the whānau and the person or the tautoko or the support person that's there. So whakawhanaungatanga is a really primary part of that initial engagement when we're looking to work alongside and work for whānau. So whānau hui, that's whānau determine what that looks like, how it looks like, who's going to support them, and what is the purpose. So purpose is a really important part of the kaupapa at this stage, because often, again, we're criteria responding to what we believe they need to have taken care of, and whānau actually wanting some of these other things taken care of. So in that whakawhanaungatanga process, it's really important that we're fully present to be able to understand and ask the questions with whānau if we're not sure. Whānau plan, so again, whānau driven, whānau determine the plan. One example of a plan where this whakawhanaungatanga and the whānau plan was used was a family that we met with. They had lots of presentations with 111 calls, and so they were a known family on the family harm or the case allocation meeting. And so we built the relationship with their huahaidu or their support person. And the whānau plan was as simple as a recipe. This family enjoyed baking together, so they set up recipes for communication, recipes for how they would navigate when they were getting into arguments. These were just simple things that whānau were able to resource once they sat down and understood what that looked like for them. The other thing is information sharing. Again, our previous speakers would have identified this is a huge barrier for us, because a lot of law or just policies often create closed doors for whānau. And so classic examples are whānau have information that they share with agencies. They go to get that information and they are informed, well, you actually need to go and ring this number, and then you need to apply, and then it might take a while. So it's just really important, and when we're doing this information sharing, that whānau understand we actually need to encourage or push back on the reason to have that information for the purpose. Okay, so if we're clear about a purpose of why we're sharing that information, then as practitioners here, we're able to do that on behalf of the family, because that's what they're needing. All right, so we have ways and means to do that indicate through the Awatea work, and we'll get into that with the Manaaki Tairāwhiti form. We do things like pull for support. So often, as previous speakers have identified, there's a lot of silo work. So I know this, you know that, and I know that, but collectively, we don't know that one another's working with the whānau. So whānau have an opportunity to sit and express or let us know who's been involved with them in the past. And it takes the village to raise the family. Well, that's what the whānau are needing. They're needing all those supports that are relevant for them, so that we can sit together collectively and share from the purpose. So it's really clear. It's important that we have that purpose that's driven from whānau voice to be able to determine what and how their needs or their aspirations are going to be met. And I just want to be clear, this whole kaupapa is rangatira ki te rangatira. So it's empowering kaupapa. So we're talking to them as somebody that's driving the kaupapa, as opposed to somebody that's sitting in the passenger seat and we're driving for them. the whole basis around this way of being and working is that whānau are able to decide, push back and pull for support, or just pause, stop the whole process until they're in a place where they can make sense of what's happening for them. So this is a very mana enhancing process all the way through. And I just want to say that that's so important, because whānau in their voice will often say, well, we get told to do this, so we're just doing it because if we don't, things are going to happen, or, you know, these are the consequences. So all the engagement is done from a rangatira perspective, and that's just that they are the architects of the kaupapa. So, oopsie boopsie. Consent. Now, there's often a kaupapa around blanket consent where we get consent and then we're just like, that's good, we can share that. But what's really important in this particular type of mahi is the ability to double loop and check back in. So at every time of an engagement where there is something new that comes up, it's checking with the whānau just to be absolutely open and transparent about the information and the opportunity of what the whānau need in order to deliberate and send the next lot of messaging to create extension in the whānau plan. So this consent isn't just one time. The Manaaki Tairāwhiti form is a form that we have used across the collective of Tairāwhiti to create opportunity for that, so that whānau aren't signing a whole heap of consent forms and this means that and that means that. It just allows us to be collective and intentionally collaborative about the way we work with and work for whānau. Oh, cool. Sorry, whānau. And there we go. Manaaki Tairāwhiti. Cool. The other overlay in this is our kaupapa here. So this is just the underpinning of it again. These are the values. The previous slide was our value steps, or our po. So this is another aspect of it, and it's really just the whānau journey and how we perceive that through the Tairāwhiti way of working. So the landscape includes the te kuri a pāwa, te kuri, and this landscape is to determine the aspects that are needed for whānau to navigate. The seedlings at the bottom are the evolution or the whānau journey and their ability to reflect and respond. The sun is obviously relevant in terms of landscape and what transitions for whānau as they're going through their journey. The three kete up here, so there's a real epistemology from a Māori worldview to be able to drive a narrative that is conducive for whānau voice. So, and the waharoa is also an aspect for people to come through, no wrong door. And we all want to see our whānau flourishing. So, I runga ki tēnā. Tēnā mihi rau atu kia koutou, are taringa mai, are taringa mai, are taringa mai. Thank you for listening.
So the important thing in the work for Tairāwhiti is if you're going to use Māori kupu, then you have to have the context of it. So this is what whānau's about, as opposed to the alliteration of family. And that's conclusion. I'm just going to get Sarah to give a passing remarks, and then we'll create the space for you to go and have a cup of tea. Kia ora, Sarah.
Kia ora, Moera. Thank you. I think just my closing remarks is, again, having had the privilege to be involved in this work, what it's kind of reinforced for us as a coaching team to reorientate ourselves in terms of the delivery for whānau. It's not a linear process, it is a journey. And actually, it's really hard to do that in really siloed working conditions. So it's if we're going to move from what John said and called a push system, where we've kind of decided the level of service, to a pull system that can move with the whānau journey, we do need to reconceive the approach. We need to have different anchor points, and we need the systems and the enablers to really support that to happen. And that's the exciting space that Manaaki Tairāwhiti are really into and exploring at the moment.
Kia ora. Thank you, Sarah. And just finally, and you'll see this later, but I thought it important to finish. And this was with the support of the gurus in Te Pūnaunui. Thank you, Mākere. Oops, that's me, not you. So if we responded to whānau voice and understood their demand and had systems that then were able and flexible enough to respond to demand, we would significantly change the lives of many whānau in Aotearoa. Kia ora.